Welcome to Call to Healing. We're two mental health practitioners on different parts of our professional journeys come together to have conversations our training left out. From cultural identity to white supremacy in our field, we're showing up despite it to spite it.
Welcome back to Call to Healing. I'm Blanca. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of Nevada.
And I'm Dr. Kasera Dayet. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist located in the state of Massachusetts. We are both in the US and we are settlers on Turtle Island, and we pay our respect to our ancestors who have stewarded this land for generations, both past and present. So, as we're recording this episode, the show is finally out. So we're recording today is May 12th, 2025. And I wanted to spend a quick moment with you, Blanca, talking about how you feel about the episode being out. When we first recorded in January, we were anticipating a lot of things, and many things have happened since then. And when we say things, we mean political things. And yeah, I just wanted to do a pulse check about that. And it doesn't have to be that specifically, but just how are you feeling?
Oh man, and there's so many ways for me to answer that question. So I think I'll just answer both. How am I feeling about the podcast? I'm excited. Um there's still a little bit of fear, but as Audre Lorde said, there's always going to be fear. So this is abridged. This is not her direct quote. Um you're going to be afraid either way, so you might as well speak up. So, to answer your question about the podcast, I'm feeling good. I'm feeling excited. There's a little bit of fear about the exposure, but I think that is just kind of part of the process. But I'm feeling okay. I'm feeling pretty grounded about it. In terms of the world at large, or specifically what's happening, uh, it's a struggle. I'm struggling. There's a lot of fear there too. I contain privilege and oppression, of course, multiple intersections of those. And the reality is, like, a lot of immigrant communities are being targeted right now. And though I'm not an immigrant, my parents are. And in the eyes of American white supremacy and colonialism, I look like an immigrant. And so I'm supposed to travel to California. And even though I'm only going from Nevada, I actually was worried that my new passport wasn't going to come in time. And it's because I'm just genuinely worried that if I get pulled over, depending on who that person is and how they're feeling that day, they may or may not decide to ask me for my quote unquote papers. So part of me sometimes feels like this fear is part of me wants to gaslight myself into saying this fear isn't real. It's not about me, but it is. It really is. And how many American citizens or how many people who are just, living their life haven't been forcibly grabbed from the street or from their homes by ICE agents. So no one is safe, and I'm terrified. And I'm doing my best to take care of myself, to show up for myself and for my clients and take it one day at a time. So how are you doing?
Yeah, I think like when we started recording, and we've checked in every week, pulse checking with one another when we've recorded. Like, I felt okay for a while, like steady, very much like this is not any different from the life I've always lived. And when I first came to this country, like, fears of deportation was just like a thing that I lived with as a young child, all the way up throughout um, schooling until I got my citizenship. And I think I spent a lot of time trying to convince people that the things that they thought wouldn't happen could and would happen. And there's a bit of like, yeah, like I've been saying this for years. Years. um and this is not one of those things that I enjoy being right about either.
Of course.
Um and I think I told you that like and for some people this may seem really silly, but for me, like I've had my meltdown when they were like, we're not gonna test milk anymore.
Oh my God.
And that was because I was just like, just little things are holding me together at this point. Um Steady things that I can rely on, like maybe not getting poisoned by my food. And um it just felt like, okay, this is a lot. Like this is too much. And maybe for someone they're like, why did it take that? And it's like, well, everybody's different. But in the background, I've had worries about my own family. And even though I'm very excited about our podcast, I'm worried about it as a sort of an existing entity at this time, and what the implications of its existence might be for me and people I care about. Um, and like having conversations with folks about like, okay, like I need you to be thinking about what would happen to me if X, right? Like
Right.
what and making sure that they understand that these are very serious conversations, that I'm not saying it in jest in any way. Like I'm like, I need to know that you will help me, right?
Right.
Um so I'm both very excited about our podcast and like worried. And I think, as you said, like I'd be afraid either way, because the track record of my career and what I've always done publicly is not something that I can erase either. Um, so that's kind of where I am right now. um, and I worried when I was editing our first episode. I'm like, ooh, are we gonna sound like super naive? And I don't think we did, but we even said like there's no way to know, and then there's also ways in which some of this has been a part of our lived experience for a long time. Um, but certainly a lot has changed since we recorded that first episode.
Yeah.
So here we are.
Here we are. What is it? We're showing up despite it to spite
Despite it. Yes.
it.
We are. And I still remain dedicated to the reasons that I wanted to do this, among which was having these kinds of conversations, but also contextualizing these conversations within our field, because, you know, despite everything that's going on, you and I are still showing up for people every day in our capacity as clinicians and consultants. Um, and there are other people who are still doing that too,
Yes.
and they also need this. And that's how I'm grounding and anchoring myself. And who knows, maybe this may become obsolete. I have no idea. But for now, it isn't. And therefore, today we're talking about our clinical niche and persona, and that even means, and how our cultural identities are wrapped up in that conversation. So, Blanca, what is our shared understanding of like what a niche is? And where do we start?
Well, I mean, I think we should start with the colonial definition. And our old friend Merriam Webster defines a niche as a place, employment, status, or activity for which a person or thing is best fitted. For example, she finally found her niche. It's also defined as a habitat supplying the factors necessary for the existence of an organism or species, the ecological role of an orgasm, orgasm, It's also defined as the ecological role of an organism in a community, especially in regard to food consumption. And then finally, a specialized market. So that's what our friend Merriam Webster defines niche as. What do you think about when you think of the concept of a niche when it comes to practicing within mental health?
Um, I mean, I think about two different parts of it. I think about niche as partly population, so the groups of people that you work with, like you usually would specialize in working with a certain population, and relatedly, what kinds of interventions you specialize in for working
Mm-hmm.
with that population.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when you had like when we were trying to choose which definitions we wanted to use and look at, you had said that one of the ones that you read kind of stuck out to you. Which one was it?
The habitat supplying the factors necessary for the existence of an organism or species.
Yeah, why that one?
Well, I think before I answer that, I want to say if someone, based on what you said, if someone were to come up to me and say, Blanca, what is your niche? I would immediately say women of color who identify as feminists. That's how I would define my niche. So, considering that, and like, I'm sorry, maybe this is too woo woo, or I'm reading too much into it, but I just think about a habitat supplying the factors necessary for the existence of an organism or species. So I think about my clients who've had therapists before who maybe weren't culturally aligned, which you don't necessarily have to be, but then also didn't have the cultural humility to support my these clients and their lived experience. And I think about how they've come to me and maybe I didn't pathologize the fact that not every detail of their personal life is readily available to their parents in order to live a happy, full life, right? Maybe about clients who have difficult relationships with their parents and would love to be able to cut them off, but due to cultural expectations, they can't. And I've made space for that. And so, again, maybe I'm just speaking too highly of it all, but it speaks to me to hear a habitat giving an organism what they need to survive. Um, so
Yeah,
that's why I liked that one.
yeah. I mean, and when you said it, like what stood out to me was that ecological piece, right? Like the niche referring to the role that a species plays in its environment, and then specifically the way in which colonization interferes with that process, right?
Say more.
Like that that leads, and again, we're speaking ecologically, right? But like colonization, like when another if another species invades, right? When a new species colonizes an area, it can interrupt or shift, right? What the niche has established. And they have to find a way to establish themselves in new conditions, or maybe they die out and they don't survive, right? There's a lot of layers to what happens. And, forgive me, ecologist, if you're listening and you're like, girl, you have butchered this, but this is how I've understood it. But connecting sort of that same concept, this requires some brain work, okay? And I'm doing it in real time. Connecting that same concept to our field, what I was talking about with you when we were thinking about this conversation was like Western psychology, Western ideas of mental health, and the way in which it's done exactly that, right? Deemed certain interventions as more helpful or less helpful for certain groups of people. And things that were known to be indigenous healing practices and very helpful for communities were shunned. But then once research says it's legitimate, it's okay. And even as a student, that was something that I was always attuned to, just like sort of the repackaging of these concepts and the way in which that repackaging is meant to serve this like Western and industrial, individualized folks, and shun other groups of people for things that have existed for centuries. So that's kind of what jumped out at me when I was thinking about this. Especially like the thing, if somebody's like, I'm still lost, I'm thinking about like mindfulness practice, for
Right.
example, right? Like that's a really good example of like something that would have been seen as, um, not legitimate until John Kabat-Zinn and other folks doing research said so, right? And you brought up other practices, right, that are sort of in a similar space.
Yeah, thinking of like the how psychedelic assisted therapy is a big thing that's happening right now, and it is very effective and great that research is being done, but a lot of communities have already been doing this work an amount of time, like I can't, thousands of years more, right? Thinking about indigenous healers in Peru and ayahuasca practices, or aren't there peyote ceremonies with indigenous communities in colonial United States, right? Or the big one that I'm thinking lately is somatics. Somatics is everywhere now, everywhere all the time. My Pilates and yoga studio that I go to is doing a nervous system workshop for $45 a head. And like, no, thank you. I'm not signing up for that. Or, healing bowls, breath work, all of these like indigenous practices now being co opted by the capitalistic definition of therapy. We're taking these indigenous practices, we're whitewashing them, and then we're selling them back to our communities. So I mean, I definitely think it's a problem across the board in mental health practices.
Yeah. And when we talk about this, we're not setting ourselves outside of this conversation in any way, right? Like we were taught interventions. We go to trainings on said interventions, or even in working with certain groups of people. And even though I've been accessing a lot more decolonized teachings and spaces, still, right? Even like there's still so many ways in which I can't totally extract myself from the
Mm-hmm.
reality that this is, because I can never claim to know 100% the healing practice of another group of people. Right? But what I can know is the way in which the field has tried to dictate what is legitimate and what is not. And I'm going off on a slight tangent here for a second, but I was thinking about this, like even with respect to coaching recently, because I posted something on my Instagram, my the anti-ableist doc Instagram, about how one of the things that I had to overcome or struggle with and still grapple with is like the looking down upon of coaches by mental health practitioners. And I've really had to interrogate. I'm like, wait a minute. Like, I had that feeling too. Like, I have been the
Yeah.
person who was disparaged, quote, life coaches. I've been the person who said, like, business coaches are more legitimate than life coaches. And, like, never interrogated until more recent years why it was that I was led to believe that any of those things were true statements. And why is it that we have to see ourselves as somehow like a scarce commodity when everyone can benefit from different types of healing and intervention practices? And what is it about the mental health field that benefits from me believing that other types of healing and interventions are less than?
Gatekeeping.
Well, of course, but like it's money.
Yeah.
Right? Money and oppression. Money and oppression. Um and I had shame about it because I was like, "Oh, you're now doing this thing." Like other and I know for a fact that there are other mental health practitioners who still think coaches are like less than, right? But we're doing different things.
Right. And there's
And
room for all of it.
right. And like the idea of a mental health crisis should not exist if we believe, right, that there are many different ways that people can access support and all of it could be legitimate. So just been a thought I've been having, and I know I took it somewhere, but yeah.
But it's all related. And if you
Mhm.
think about it, this is how your niche changed.
Yes. Yeah.
We're still talking about your niche. It's just an evolved niche, right? Right now, again, if I'm going to answer off the top of my head, I work with women of color who identify as feminists. That niche might change at any point in the next couple of years or months, and or even as I shift my practice from in person to online only, which is happening this month. Yay.
Yeah.
That's a change in the niche. And I do think, you know, when we're indoctrinated by mental health practitioner programs, therapy counseling programs, we leave with a very specific idea of what it means to be successful in this work. And we're talking about having an office, and not even just having an office, but having an office that you don't share with anyone else. That's yours alone, so you can decorate it however you want. And then it's maybe becoming a supervisor. And then maybe it's teaching classes, or maybe it's getting your doctorate. Like, well, in my case, specifically because I come from a background I'm a mental health practitioner on a master's level. I'm seeing some of my peers now look into PhD or PsyD or other kind of doctorate programs. And those are measures of success for them. It doesn't have to be a measure of success for absolutely everyone. I forgot where I was going with all of this, but all of it to say that these beliefs about coaches versus therapists, the master's level therapists versus doctorate level therapists, and are you a supervisor or not, and do you have an online presence or not? Um, it's just all the stuff we were indoctrinated with in our training.
Yeah.
Oh, and which certificates you have, and why are you trained in EMDR but don't have a certificate in EMDR? Because I don't have $5,000 to keep doing what I'm doing already. So why do I need the certificate? Anyway.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, it's a money sink. It's a huge money sink for people to leave feeling less than, so that they keep spending their money because they continue to feel less than. And by the way, I'm not saying that people should not be, and I want to be careful about how I say this, but like I think it's important to be trained appropriately, whatever that means, right? I'm not even necessarily saying that within a colonial frame. To be trained appropriately to work with different groups of people, right? Like I don't think anybody should be out here believing that they can serve everyone. And because I do think that that does us the disservice to folks, and we can like get into that a little bit more, um, and what I mean by that. But I do think that there is a way in which the model serves to feed into feelings of inadequacy, and make you feel like you don't have enough to be able to do X, whatever that is. And, right now, I know you mentioned it, like I mean, I do psychological testing in my practice still with primarily neurodivergent folks across age range, and trauma focused evals. But the other sort of client shift where it's less therapy and more coaching is working specifically with clinicians of color who want liberatory practices. And what I'm seeing over and over and over again with the folks that I speak to is that there's something that they feel needs to happen before they can have their practice. Or they have their practice, but they somehow believe that they're the reason that they don't have clients. And if they just had more training, that would somehow solve this issue. And when really what I tend to see is a proliferation of feelings of deep inadequacy, largely connected to the field and the way they were trained, or even what other professionals said to them. That's the work that we're doing. And the marketing and the belief change, like that's like the comma, right? Like it's included in the work that I'm doing, but that's not the bulk of the work. And it's so, and that's that leads back to why I wanted to do the podcast, because it's like it blows my mind, like the level of trauma. And even listening back to when I talked about my grad school experience, I was like, damn, that was like messed up. It was really messed up.
Yeah.
And I wasn't even aware, as I've known intellectually for a long time, but to drop back into it and then to listen to it. Sometimes our endless pursuit of certain certifications is about that feeling of inadequacy.
And feeling like you have to serve everyone and do it well, when in reality, I don't feel a need to compete with any other therapist out there. The need is so great, and there's not enough of us to fill the gaps. So I really don't feel the need. And it was highlighted for me actually last week because I had a call with a potential client, and they were well aligned in every way. And one of the things they really wanted to work on was their OCD. And that is just not one of my strong suits. And I could sit here and judge myself for it, but the reality is I don't have to be the therapist for absolutely everyone. And I had plenty of referrals ready to go for that person, and that person was shocked. They were like, "Oh my god, that is amazing. I none of the other therapists I talked to offered me referrals for people who might be an even better fit." I'm like, "Why do I want to take your money and your time and your energy if I know someone else can be better suited for you? I don't have to be everyone's the perfect therapist for everybody." And I did tell this person we could do great work around several of these domains that you're talking about. And the OCD is going to intersect with all of these. And that is going to be a big part that's going to be missed by me. And I could go on Pezzy. I could go on any other continuing education website and get trained up on this stuff. And I think I will because it is information I want. But there we go again, having to spend additional money to what?
Right.
Be the perfect therapist for absolutely every person that calls me? I don't think
Yeah.
so. I'm tired.
Yeah. And it's not possible. It's not possible. And this is, and it may not even be responsible.
Right.
And this is a conversation that I had with my old therapist. If he's listening, um, love him to death. And by the time we ended, the conversations that we were having was like, I think that you were great for X, Y, and Z. And now I'm at a point where I need this. And you've clearly told me that, like, you cannot offer that. And I think because of the relationship and the importance of the relationship, he struggled to to be the one to say, okay, it's time. Right? I kind of had to be the person to be like, it's time. And that was really hard because I think that we are responsible. We, the person with the most power in this arrangement, um, are responsible for being clear about that. And there have been times where I've noticed it even when I'm working with someone and things change. And I'm like, I think that what you need right now is different than what I can provide.
Hmm.
And I know that that might be very hard to hear because of the relationship. And also, it's not fair for me to keep working with you knowing that you deserve something else.
Right.
Um, and, you'll hear these people keep some folks in treatment for like ever, and there's no movement. Right. And I know we're sort of dancing around this, but like, I think in some ways we're sort of answering this question of like why niches might be important. And we've talked about like the power implications of even just the idea of a niche, but you know, like what makes it important to you?
To have a niche.
Yeah.
I think part of it, and again, I'm thinking through this in real time also. So for some grace, as I kind of have this half baked thought, but I think having a niche is important to me because part of it, it allows me to show up as I am. And I don't know if this is better suited for a different episode, maybe on like clinical persona, but I like being who I am. Of course, there's certain boundaries I adhere. Of course, there's, my best friend isn't going to get therapist Blanca, and my clients aren't going to get best friend Blanca, but they both get Blanca. They just do. And I do feel like having the niche I have gives me space for that. Again, I don't know that this is the perfect thought, but that's the thought that comes up for me. What about you?
Yeah, for me, I think it was a combination of both being called, if we're going back to just like even the reason for our show title being what it is, feeling called to work with certain groups of people. And those groups of people, unsurprisingly, happened to be my people,
Mm-hmm.
as we say, right? Like I was working with immigrant folks, neurodivergent folks, queer folks, with the overlapping um, feature, for lack of a better word, of complex trauma,
Right.
right? Like that's where I live and hang out. And I think as I talked about um just like the call to like go to school for this is that I felt like accessing this information gave me like a certain understanding of my own experiences, especially as an immigrant, um, black, queer woman, um, that it helped me metabolize things that I don't know I otherwise would have. And in the metabolization of that, I was like, what would it be like if other folks like me could also have that? What would
Right.
it be like for their therapist to be thinking systemically, for their assessor to be thinking systemically, and about the ways in which identity and systems play such a huge role in our mental well-being? And
A
that's
hundred
kind of sorry, that's why like that's kind of where like my niche came from, and within that I had certain interventions that I was trained in, some which I held on to, some which I discarded depending on what I noticed. um, for example, discarded trauma focused CPT, um, because I found, especially with my complex trauma population, progressive muscle relaxation was actually super activating, especially for sexual trauma. And I was like, "Ooh, I don't know if anybody really thought about this." And I saw it like with a couple of different clients, and then I was like, "Never mind." And so then for me, it became like with my kiddos, like more play therapy, and then conversations about how do you make sure play therapy is explained as a legitimate intervention to parents, um, and cognitive processing therapy, but like narrative work, and so
Mhm.
um, I know I'm speaking in a lot of jumbly terms, and some of our listeners may or may not be familiar with that language. But long story short, um, I think the biggest thing that I gained was that like systems piece, identity piece. Yeah.
Yeah, and everything you've been saying has reminded me of, there's a practitioner on social media. She used to have a business called The Healing Strategy. I believe she's shifted out of that. Josie something. But I used to follow her very closely while I was still in my grad program because I was so excited about the work she was doing. And I'll never forget, she once said that your niche, more or less, is an unhealed version of you. Which I do wonder how
Mm.
much that plays a role. And unhealed, we don't have to get into all the semantics of, but a past version of you. And I have two very specific experiences with therapists that have come up in thinking about this. I had a therapist that was an older white woman, and I was talking about some experiences of racism, and she said, "Why is everything about race for you?"
Oof.
She didn't say, "I hear you." She didn't give space to my feelings, my even or cognitive process, even nothing. She just immediately was like, "Why is everything about race for you?" Ugh. And
The
then another
aggression.
one, the
That's
the
just,
dismissiveness.
yes. It's such an aggressive statement.
I don't think I saw her after that. I think that was the last one. And then I had an experience with an older therapist of color. And it was specifically at a time in my life where I was experiencing a lot of relational trauma with the men I was dating. And she said, "Oh, you need to read this book." And it's called Why Men Love Bitches.
No
I swear to
way.
God. And
No way.
of course, I was immediately like, no. But I was like in my mid-ish 20s. So I was like, okay, whatever. She's a professional. Maybe let me just read this and see. I couldn't get past like the first chapter or so. It was conflating men to animals and using sex as a bait for them to get them to behave the way you want them to. And if you give them sex too soon, it's just blah.
Oh
And so
god.
I think about those two experiences. And now I think about the fact that I'm telling you I work with primarily women of color who are feminists. Tell me how my niche is not a past version of me,
Mhm.
right? Women of color making their way through their professional experiences, their romantic life, dealing with, if they're bicultural, dealing with the conflicting cultural expectations of their home culture versus the larger culture that they live in the United States. Maybe who want to date men and have been very harmed by men and are continuing to be harmed by patriarchy at large, and making space for the fact that I love men and men hurt me. So anyway, a little bit.
Yeah,
I got a little bit aside, but there we go. There's my
no.
niche
No,
right
that's
there.
totally related, and I know we said we wouldn't get into the semantics, but I don't love the world unhealed either because I think that that just it's pathologizing, and I
Yes.
get the implication, right? I get the implication. Um, I think it could account for the fact that, like, we're constantly shifting in and out of certain parts of our identity at various times. But what absolutely resonates with me about that is that, like, my coaching is absolutely a result of experiences that I've had, and watching other people and not wanting them to have to deal with those same things. Um, Specifically, like, even I think I mentioned, I can't remember, but like I was talking to an early career professional recently who's working on a large group practice, very similar to my initial setup. And I asked her like how much she got paid per hour, and she told me $50. And she thought that that was fine. Didn't think anything of it. And I looked back, and these documents triggered the hell out of me. I looked back at my old offer letter for that group practice, and they were paying me out of psychology grad school $34,000 a year. 34,000. And at least when to start, that seemed okay.
Yeah.
And then their raise when I got licensed would be 38,000.
Wow.
Right? Total. So not
And
on
for
top of.
context, and
Yes.
for context, I think that when you hear 30 to $50 an hour, considering we live in a world where minimum wage in some states is about $7 an hour, and you're hearing us talk like $50 an hour isn't enough, there's two very important things you need to understand. Well, three. One, no one makes enough, period. We need to raise the wage. A $15 minimum wage, which we've been fighting for over 10 years now, 15 years, is obsolete.
Right.
$30 minimum wage. I mean, and that's coming from zero research. So I actually probably believe it should be more. But let's just say like the 15 that we're fighting for is obsolete at this point. The second thing that's important to clarify is that therapists aren't working 40 hours a week, direct client. So when someone says they're making $30 an hour, that's $30 face to face with a client,
Right.
which depending on the therapist could be anywhere from 15 hours a week to 25 or 30. So it's not like we're talking about making $50 an hour working, getting a salary of 40 hours a week. We're talking that is not enough to live off of. And I think frequently about the agency I work at, and I have some conflicting feelings about their values, but I make the most amount of money there. And I would love to be able to work at a place with values that more directly align with mine, but I don't have a husband and I don't have anyone's backup salary to pay the mortgage. I have to pay my mortgage. I have to pay my way in life. And so just a little bit of context there that I know what it sounds like to say $50 an hour isn't enough when people maybe are making 8, 7 or 8, but $50 an hour, 15 hours a week is not enough.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I don't know if you named all three contexts, but also loans, by the
Oh, and
way.
oh, that one too. Yeah. Oh, yes. The other context was yes,
Yeah,
education, student loans. Yeah.
yeah. And whenever whenever people say like, well, especially the people who critique, well, they should have found a way to pay for a school. I I love to encourage those people to think about the fact that we are fighting with each other about this versus fighting for the real problem, which is that education access isn't free and accessible to all, right? That's the problem here. And that the person that you're criticizing for maybe having student loan debts is your doctor or your therapist, and without which they would not have been able to access those things. And why is it set up that way, right? And there's paying for your benefits and all of these other things that happen, right? And so there's like a lot of layers to this. And so um I appreciate you adding the context, and I don't want to feel like I'm asking for too much, like to be able to live. And I don't think
Right.
anybody should feel that way, right? um because like, yeah, it's skill. But anyway, um, I think all of that is in the reason why I had brought this up is because I was going to say that like practices like that take advantage of you not knowing what is a livable amount of money, commensurate with the experience that you have, the amount of school that you went, the years of schooling that you did, and the amount of debt that you might be in order to access that schooling to do what? To serve people, right? To be a health service professional. And so like I bring that up because I'm like, I was being taken advantage of.
Right.
This other young Black woman is also being taken advantage of. And what would it be like for these practices to try to imagine from the start something that is way more equitable? And it is possible. It is possible. Um, but I think because they know people don't want to do certain things, like handle their own billing and all of these different things, right? That like they could also say, we don't really need to tell them how much we get off the top.
Right.
And so people in these practices get stuck seeing a lot of different folks that they don't necessarily want to see. I know that was certainly something that happened to me, that like I kind of had a pretty strong sense of the kind of people that I wanted to see, the kind of niche that I wanted to have. But I was greatly restricted by the way this practice was set up, and told like, "Well, you just need to wait and like be here for a little while." And it is totally a way to feed burnout, to not let people define where they feel most comfortable working and with who. And you mentioned like authentic self. That's a part of it, and again, as you said, like maybe that's a little bit more like what your persona is, but I don't think those things are separate, right? That like even the systems that I use to understand and conceptualize the minds of people and their lives is very much influenced by my own identity and what I've come to understand about what I was taught and what I needed to unlearn and relearn, and I'm still learning. So,
It's quite a journey. I mean, and it never stops, right? Like, I'm sure our niches will continue to evolve as we continue to work and grow. I do think this conversation has been amazing. I don't even think we've had to use our little prepared questions as much. Everything's just come out naturally. But there is one in particular that I really want us to talk about, and that's did you feel any pressure to serve outside of your niches or your niche?
yeah, I
And
mean,
from
I
who?
think
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's exactly what I was just saying, right? Which is that like
Mm,
when I was not working for myself, there was a lot of pressure not only to work outside of my niche, but also to not be allowed to do certain things that I wanted to be able to do. Like I wanted to be able to do testing with certain groups of people, and I was told that like our neuropsychologists do this, so you can't do that. And I'm like,
mm,
but wait, I'm not trying to do neuropsychological testing batteries, even though I was trained to do that. It was just cognitive testing, which all psychologists are trained to do, right?
mhm.
Um, or even using more therapeutic assessment interventions, like with my assessments, which I'm now finally getting to do. Um, but like for sure, both like what I was allowed to do and who I was allowed to work with. I was even told, because I've always worked with autistic folks. Um, one of my intakes, the kid had a meltdown. This happens. Tore up my office, threw his shoe. I had no problem like seeing the kid again. And I was told by the practice, because the administrative assistant told them what happened, that I couldn't see this kid again. And they were like, we just don't want to accept that liability.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
And
what was the like?
yeah,
Apologize. What was the liability exactly?
to me, none, right? To them, the kid having a meltdown in an office, we can't see them in our practice. And I'm just like, so why do you even want to say you're a practice who works with kids?
Right.
Right? Like, I remember I had another kid who was just struggling to transition out of my office. We were having a Lego argument. he, he wanted to take some Legos home, and he just got staked out on the floor and would not get up. And I had like other, therapists being like, you need to get him out of this area. And I'm like, what do you want me to do? Like, the intervention is happening right here, right here. And so, eventually we worked it out. But like, those were the kinds of things that would happen. And I'm like, the discrimination that occurs just to like certain diagnostic populations, but especially for children, is
Mhm.
wild. And I'm just like, you
Mhm.
have no business as a practice saying that your clinicians work with this population if you are going to discriminate against autistic kids for being themselves.
Right.
And so when I started working for myself, like, I was able to work with those kiddos, and yeah, like, still stuffed a whole roll of toilet paper in my toilet and other things, and like things that happen, that they happen, and we work it out. But like, I was perfectly fine with that. But the group practice was deciding what I should or shouldn't do. And so, yeah, I definitely was like prevented from working with certain groups of people or even doing certain interventions. What
Yeah.
about you?
God, I mean, several. I think first I was told, this isn't quite directly related to my niche, but the director of my program said I wouldn't be a good therapist to white people because of my focus in social justice. And so I'm just like, do you realize what you are saying about white people here? But of course not. Then I think about a time, which is ironic, where I got an evaluation in school. I had someone who I believed as a student was potentially personality disordered and potentially a pedophile. And I sought supervision about these things, got all the support that I needed, allegedly, to manage this. And then my evaluation that semester came around, and I was given a 4 out of 4 for utilizing supervision because I would utilize the shit out of supervision. I'm feeling like this. I am thinking this. How do I take that and support the client? And then in that same exact evaluation, I was marked a 1 out of 4 for recognizing how my identities show up in the room, which this is a little bit long winded, but I'm like, how do you, okay, I either utilize supervision well, and if I do, then isn't it because I am aware of my identities and how I'm showing up? Like, you can't, that doesn't make any sense to me. But I was told that my identities as a feminist and that my identities as a Latina were impacting negatively how I show up and see clients. And it was specifically because this person that I thought was potentially a pedophile and potentially personality disordered was a Latino man. So there was that. And then I think just on a macro level, I feel like I get on another level, I get a lot of flack for being a marriage and family therapist who doesn't want to work with families or couples or kids. I love children. I think I respect children. They deserve the best care. I'm not that person. I'm not the right therapist for that. I think couples work is great. It's not for me. It's just not for me. I tried it under supervision. I gave it a shot and it was just not for me, and that's okay. So that pressure is absolutely there. And I always get emails, "Are you sure? Can you take this teen?" No, I can't take this teen. I am not the appropriate therapist for this teen, no matter what. It's just not, it's, and that's okay. But yeah, those are usually the pressures I have. But yeah.
Well, relatedly, I mean, this circles back to the earlier conversation, but I don't think we've said this explicitly. Like, the other importance of this is managing harm, right? Like, that the importance of me knowing that I cannot nor should not work with everyone is also about making sure that I'm not like engaging in intentional harm of folks, and like, or unintentional, I guess, however we want to put it. This, like, and I'm not saying that I still haven't harmed people, right? There are so many things that happen because therapy, clinical work is like this messed up version of a relationship, right? Where you're using the self in order to like engage in healing processes, right? But like, anyway, there's like a whole different multi layers to that, right? But like, I say messed up because the way in which we're trained does not really properly acknowledge all of these different layers and factors. Um, but you forcing yourself to work with families when you know that that doesn't feel right for you or isn't where you feel most skilled or however you would fill it out is important because they deserve a therapist who is not only willing and to show up for them and able to and feels well trained enough to do so. Like all of these things have to be true, right? Just like I work with like in historically I've worked with like panic disorder and social phobia, especially with my kiddos. But OCD, as you mentioned earlier, is not it's not my area of expertise. And when that has come up with those folks, I've referred out or adjunctive, like I'm still working with them, but they might see somebody specifically for that. Or, maybe there's an issue that comes up, like substance use, for example. Like I do a lot of those evaluations, but I don't feel equipped necessarily to work with that in treatment. And so I think like I'm just stringing this person along is what it feels like if I'm to just say, okay, like I know that I'm not the one for you, but I keep seeing you every week anyway, when you deserve something different. Right?
Yeah.
Um anyway, that's just a really long way of saying that I think niches, at least on the positive side, help to keep us conscious about the kind of care that people deserve to have.
Yeah. And I do want to say too, right? Like this isn't necessarily mean that if you don't have a niche that that's wrong. Some people are generalists and they have their reasons for that and I have no problem with that. I personally don't consider myself a generalist. Um and I also don't believe in ownership of clients, right? I remember as a student therapist in a community setting, so not seeing clients in school, but still seeing clients as a student outside of school. I had a client whom I loved, I adored, and they had trauma that was not appropriate for the skill level I was at. And so I was again doing the adjunct with another therapist. And then that therapist came to me and I could tell she was panicked because she wanted to suggest that she take that client full time. And she was so panicked that I was going to feel like she was taking that client from me. And I was like, no, 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 no. I want my client to have the best care possible. And it is not about me that it's not me. Right. And I remember the relief on her face. And I think that that happens because people do have this ownership or like, it has to be me, or I have to work with this person, or this person, I can't refer them out just because I'm not an expert in this. I don't know. But that I'll never forget the panic and in the relief on her face when I was like, yeah, I think that's okay. I think you would do great work with her. Absolutely. Can I have one more session with her just to say goodbye? And that was it.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you underscored that example though, because I think that like, and this is just me. So for folks who are listening, I'm not saying that Blanca necessarily shares this opinion in its entirety, right? But for me, I would add a comma to it's okay to be a generalist. Um, it is not okay to be an unconscious generalist. I don't think it's okay to be unconscious anything. I think that we need to be intentional in every choice that we make about who we're working with and why, and
Mm-hmm.
be able to acknowledge the limitations of that. And that's, we've said that in different ways, but I want to state that explicitly. because the reason I brought up my old therapist was that, like, at the end of the day, he kind of was more of a generalist.
Mm-hmm.
And I still love him, but he struggled to say when that was not enough for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I had to be the one to say, this is not enough for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, who says that? Who says what? We could probably have a whole conversation just about that, right? What is whose responsibility? But I think that, like, when you're, even if it's as decolonized as it can get, the setup of your practice, the client, the patient might often, not always, right? Might often feel like they'd have the harder time saying, like, this isn't working for me. Just because the relationship becomes so important. You become so interwoven into someone's life. And sometimes I think clinicians have a hard time saying the hard thing because it feels hard for them. And it is not about us. And you said that already, right? But, like, it is not about us. And I think, like, the dangers of niches and personas is the ownership piece that ends up feeling personal and maybe gets in the way of us making really important decisions.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. So, Blanca, we're doing an advicey question, right? For
Okay.
folks who maybe are emerging professionals, or maybe even, like, haven't thought about this, and hopefully this conversation has helped people think about this on different layers. But, like, what advice would you give to, like, emerging BIPOC practitioners who haven't thought about this at all? They're trying to find it, they're trying to redefine it, or maybe folks who've had their practice for a while and they're like, I really never thought about this. Like, any
Oh.
thoughts?
Yeah, I think the first one that comes to mind is don't rush it. You don't have to figure it out tomorrow. Don't rush it. And then the second thing I might say, and God, why am I thinking about qualifying this as if I'm not, if I can't speak to it? I might suggest tuning into yourself and, like, your different sessions and seeing what work feels the best, what work sits with your soul, with your person, even maybe somatically. And maybe just keep a brainstorming paper, journal, whatever, and keep note of that, right? Which sessions do you walk away feeling the most full from? And I'm not saying that this means the easiest sessions. I feel like I've been able to identify my niche in my hardest sessions, my heaviest sessions, because despite how difficult it is, or despite how heavy it is, I'm walking away feeling like I did something for that client, or that client got somewhere important in that session. However you want to qualify that for yourself. But I think just tune into your spirit, to your somatics too, and see what's moving you, and I think make note of that. What about you?
No, I would definitely second that, especially because when I had more space to think in my practice, which required me to set it up a certain way, right? That's the liberation work. That is when I was able to identify exactly what you're talking about, right? Which is that we're not talking about good as a label here. We're talking about the sense that the work is aligned work, and your body feels that. It feels it. Um it's not draining work, because hard doesn't necessarily mean draining, and I mean, like, draining my spirit. I don't mean, like, energy, right? Because the work that we do, there is energy involved. There's energy expenditure. Like, we can't escape that. Um and I remember there were just some folks that it just felt not great to sit with. And I was like, that's because this just isn't, these are not my people. These are not my people. Um, and that's not to say there's something wrong with the person. It's that I am not for everybody. And I need to be able to suss out what that looks like and feels like. So, yeah, I think that that is a great way to think about this for sure. And relatedly, somebody's like, well, if I don't know, like, how do I market myself? Like, and I'm putting that in air quotes if you're listening, because like marketing, capitalism, blah, 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 blah. But it's really like communicating, right? About you. Being tuned into who you are and what your values are is just as important. Like, um, especially when I think about like intersectional feminists, right? That's how we see ourselves and we talk about ourselves. And like, I've written that on my website in the past when I was doing more therapy work for that group of people. And I've had people say, like, I'm so glad you said this. Like, this is why I want to work with you. And so understanding like your values and how that informs your work and and that you communicate that to people, right? Like, I personally feel like if you're going to bother to list yourself online in any way, shape, or form, like if people don't know where your values are at, like that's an automatic no for me. Because when I'm looking for therapists for folks, I'm trying to get a sense of where the values are because I want to make sure that I'm not sending this person into like significant harm's way.
Agreed. And I have always thought that one of the reasons that I've had a successful practice is there's no mystery about where my values lie on any of my profiles. I think specifically all my profiles say that I'm an intersectional feminist that believes systems of oppression have an impact on our lived experience. That is very fucking clear.
Yes.
Who I am and how I show up. And I think that's why I've had the thriving practice that I've had.
Yes. And similarly, I think on mine, I had previously like, written that I'm like, I don't believe in blank slate. And that as like a very easily identifiable black person, like I don't have the privilege of being blank in any way, right? And so ignoring those attributions, this just doesn't make any sense. Like even just for who I am as a person.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think we have another episode there about blank slates.
Maybe our personas? I don't know. I don't
Oh,
know.
yeah. It
We'll
could go
see.
in there for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll see. So, I think we're at the end of the conversation, the meat of the conversation. And so, where are we, Blanca?
I think it's time for our moment of joy and breathing.
Yes.
So, if you feel so called, please join us in taking a deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth slowly, almost like you're breathing through a straw. And if you do find breathing a little activating, please just feel free to put your hand over your heart. No pressure to sit here with us in this. All right. So, Kasera, what are a couple moments of joy or thriving for you this week?
My moment of joy was rollerblading for the second time this season. Um Last week I went and I fell leaving my apartment complex, and it was a glorious fall that was witnessed by a cyclist. And yesterday I just felt more in my element. I mean, I rollerbladed a lot as a kid. Um but I had techno music playing in my like pocket in my leggings as I'm going, and I was just weaving around, and I felt like the flow state that I always got when I was still physically able to run. And it just felt good. It just felt good to be with my body in that way yesterday. So that's a big one. And I stopped at a local bookstore this afternoon before our recording, um, and I'm turning around because I wanted to see it. I got this mutual aid, building solidarity during this crisis and the next book, just to think a little bit more about mutual aid work and structuring that. And I mean, I have other folks that I work with who do that, but I thought it would be good for me to be cogitating in that space right now as I'm trying to settle my soul into things that will help me stay in community.
Yeah, I love that. And I think maybe we should do a book club on Patreon.
Oh my gosh. Eventually.
Yes, eventually.
we,
Eventually.
we need the patrons. Come on, join us. If y'all want that, let us know. So,
Yeah.
yeah. What about
Let's
you?
see. Joy and thriving for me this week. Um, well, I guess a little bit more muted maybe, but I had vertigo last week and I've been having some of the lingering nausea if I move my head around too much, but that's getting a lot better. I feel a lot better. And so that's my thriving this week. Um, and then I think, oh, I'm also going to the Ventura County Strawberry Festival this week, which
Oh,
I'm really excited
yay.
about. Um, I love strawberries. I love strawberries, and I want to go to the strawberry festival. So I'm doing that this week with some much needed time off. So those are
Yeah,
my joys.
you reminded me, sorry. You reminded me that I haven't even looked at the Strawberry Festival's calendar yet, and that was something that I had plotted out. I went to 4 strawberry festivals last year. So,
Yeah, I'm very excited. I'm very excited. I'm going to come back looking like a strawberry. It's going to be a little bit cooler than I wanted because it's right by the beach, but that's okay. There's still open water, which is very healing.
are we going to share a picture with with our patrons of you
Sure,
with the
yeah.
strawberries?
Absolutely. I would love to do that. Oh, I love that. Yeah, we'll do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, enjoy the Strawberry Festival, and I look forward to our next conversation. I hope the listeners are as well, and we'll see you for our next episode.
See you
All
next
right.
time. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining us on our journey. You can find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Please leave us a review and subscribe. You can email us at calltohealingpodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on YouTube and Instagram at Call to Healing. Sign up for our mailing list, book us for speaking engagements and consulting, or donate to support this endeavor at our one-time donation link in the show notes. You can find even more goodness from us on Patreon at patreon.com/calltohealing. Keep in mind our views are our own and do not represent any organization we may be a part of. Even though we're both clinicians, listening to this podcast does not constitute a therapeutic relationship or clinical contract. If you hear anything that resonates with you in crisis, please seek the help of a trusted provider or the resources provided on our social media page. And remember, you're made for more than just healing. You're made to thrive. Until next time, rest easy.